Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Richard Allen Turner. I'm a board-certified pediatrician. Welcome to my channel, Kids Info Network Dayton. I hope you enjoy the show. Focus Kids is coming right up.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm my girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
That was the still face experiment video we just watched. It's the renowned work of one of my two guests on the show today. He is a giant, a true pioneer in the field of infant-parent relationships and mental health. His career has spanned over 5 decades, and he's literally written the library on the topic. Equally impressive in her body of work and reputation, my second guest on the show has over 20 years experience as a general and behavioral pediatrician. She now specializes in childhood mental health. She is an acclaimed author and speaker, and she is also the director of the Hello It's Me project. In this first segment in a series of episodes exploring infant-parent relationships and mental health, we'll discuss the significance of the still face experiments as well as tech in these critical relationships. Our conversation is based on their fascinating book, The Power of Discord, which together they co-authored. Please check out the links to the book and their other works right down there in the description. It's my honor and privilege to welcome to the show Dr. Ed Tronick and Dr. Claudia Gold. Dr. Tronick, Dr. Gold, First, let me welcome you to Focus Kids, and let me say thank you so much for being on the show. Before we get into the discussion of the book and its very important concepts, why don't you go ahead and take a moment to introduce yourselves and your book, The Power of Discord.
I'm a developmental psychologist and a clinical psychologist, and I teach at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And I also do research in the Department of Neonatology at Harvard Medical School. And I've been spending most of my career looking at the development of infants and the development of relationships between infants and people around them, trying to understand the processes of development and the factors, both good and bad, that affect development.
And Dr. Gold.
Hi, I'm a pediatrician and I specialize in infant parent mental health. I've had a kind of long and winding career, and I work with moms with opioid use disorders and their babies. And I also run a program for the community that's focused on parent-infant relationships, in addition to writing and teaching in its program.
Opioids, unfortunately, are everywhere. I see a lot of it in my practice in rural Indiana, believe it or not. So sadly, It's everywhere. Dr. Gold, you're the director of the Hello, It's Me project. Would you tell our viewers a little bit about that program?
Sure. Well, it ties in very well with the book because it's rooted in the work of Barry Brazelton, who's had a big influence on me and on Dr. Tronick, and his recognition of the baby's tremendous capacity for connection and communication right from birth, and also the value of spending time around the time of birth, listening to the baby's unique voice and supporting parents in their own expertise. So the program is organized around that concept, and I work closely with maternity nurses, pediatricians, a whole bunch of practitioners in the community who interface with parents and young infants with the aim of really calling attention to the need to support these tender new relationships and to support parents in this often disorganizing transitional period of life.
And Dr. Tronick, will you tell our viewers about the Small Moments, Big Impact app?
The Small Moments, Big Impact app was one that I did with Barry Zuckerman, who's a pediatrician and was head of pediatrics at Boston Medical Center. And the aim of the program was to hear the voices of parents during the periods of time over the first couple of years about the issues that they faced, how they were dealing with becoming parents, issues that they had around the infant, and issues that they had in terms of balancing being parents and taking care of infants at the same time. And in that way, it probably is an extension of or a continuation of the kind of work that Claudia is doing in her program. But the key for the Small Moments was to actually focus on the voice of the parents and their experience. So it's something that I think brings a lot to parents as well as to pediatric providers as a way of working with the parents and the infants that they're seeing.
I was going to ask if it targets more parents or pediatricians, but it sounds like it kind of targets both.
It does target both. One goal was to get pediatricians to have material that they could use with the parents that they were seeing, something that, for example, you could view together with your parents of the young children, and also something for parents and other providers to be looking at as a way of discussing some of the issues that come up.
Dr. Tronick, we just watched the still face video, and so let's start the show talking about the still face paradigm. How did you develop it? What has it revealed in infants and toddlers, and even older kids and adults?
The still face video was an attempt on my part to have an experiment which demonstrated how sensitive infants were to the emotions and the communications that parents made with them. And it was also an attempt to see what kind of relationship capacities the infant had. So in thinking about the experiment, I've been doing a lot of watching of mothers and infants. I had actually worked in Harry Harlow's lab, working with monkeys during the surrogate monkey experiments. So I wanted to figure out an experiment that would show the infant's reaction to social stimuli. And it seemed one way to do it was to have the mother not respond to the actions of the infant. So in a sense, to take her out of the picture. And in many ways, I wasn't really fully prepared for the infant's reaction. The infants react very strongly. Your viewers have seen that. And they pick up on it immediately, and clearly reestablishing that relationship with the parent is critical. That the breaking of connection, I think, speaks to something more fundamental than I understood at the time. It speaks to the human need for connection with other people. And we're seeing it in infants. So it's a very basic and foundational kind of quality. So over the years, what's happened with this still face is that we've begun to appreciate more and more the significance of how infants pick up on the emotions that are expressed, that they try to reestablish that connection, and critically, which you'll see also relates to the book that Claudia and I did together, that when the interaction is resumed and the mother and the infant are again engaged with one another, that the recovery or the repair at that time is really quick, and the infant comes back and overcomes the stress that they experienced during the still face.
There's one still face that was done 2 days apart that demonstrated that infants can have kind of a memory for interactions. Can either or both of you describe this particular still face and what are its implications?
We did this experiment to see if there was any kind of memory for the event in infants. And so we had a parent do the still face like you showed in the video. We had the mothers, when they began the still face, take a yellow bib and put it on their chest just at the beginning of the still face as a kind of marker for what was going on. And we watched the infants on day one reacting to the still face, and we saw really typical reactions. And then 2 days later, we had the mothers and the infants come into the laboratory again, and the mother now did the still face a second time. And what we saw there was both behavioral and physiologic changes on the part of the infants who were seeing the still face a second time. So they were more reactive, they showed more distress, and they showed, for example, heart rate changes. And that was compared to a group of infants who came into the laboratory on day one, but just played with the mother. So they didn't see the still face, but they were in the laboratory setting. And then they came in on day two, and on day two, they saw the still face. And when we compared the infants who had seen it twice to the infants who had only seen it once, we saw this reaction on the part of the infants who saw it twice, and they were more reactive to it.
So, and as far as its implication, I can give you another clinical vignette, which is that Dr. Tronick gave a talk in my community where we have the Hello It's Me project, and a number of the nurses were there. And they shared with me when I would go around in the hospital with them how much of an impact it had on them to know that. And that, so here they are, they see these kind of multi-generational transmission of trauma and substance use, and they see these very vulnerable families, and they feel really helpless. And then it was really motivating to them to do the kind of work that the Hello It's Me project is all about, which is to really take time with the parents to support them, and not only that, to engage them in the community so that in the immediate postpartum period, if there are struggles that they're having, that there's a really strong network of support, because they could see that this is the time where our society really needs to help parents who have had all sorts of issues in their lives to be present with their babies in this way, because when they're not, the babies really notice it.
And this is for either one of you. Prior to your still face experiments, what was the prevailing thought about infants and social connection prior to the still face?
Well, at the time that I did this experiment, the view of the infant was that they were, one view was that they were a blank slate. That was the learning theorist, that everything had to be learned over time. Another view was the view from William James, who's probably the father of American psychology, who viewed the infant's world as a blooming, buzzing confusion. And then there was Freud, who thought that the infant had only two states, which was either a kind of quietude or sleep and a distressed state. So we had very little understanding of, or we had a picture of the infant as being asocial and really being incompetent. And what we saw in the still face was that the infant was really quite social, that connection with other people was critical, and that they had all sorts of capacities to engage in social interaction.
Okay. And Dr. Gold, Dr. Brazelton actually demonstrated that this starts occurring within a few hours of life when newborns are just a few hours old. Can you talk a little bit about those types of behaviors and observations in newborns?
They're extraordinarily powerful, and that's what I was saying, that when you really just take the time, you know, around the time of delivery of a baby, there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of adjustments to life for the baby and for the parents. And when you pause and really just hang out with the baby, even right after they're born, you know, they have preferentially quiet to a parent's voice. They can turn 180 degrees to a voice. They have abilities to kind of close in on themselves when they're overwhelmed. And all sorts of kind of purposeful movements with their extremities, just way more than you would think. And it's just tremendously valuable to take that time early on, especially when parents are also so open to change, so that those of us who are parents remember, even when our kids are, you know, grown adults, every moment around the delivery, because your mind is so open. So it's really a wonderful time for getting in there and supporting that relationship.
When I started working with Barry Brazelton, which was back in the late 1960s and 70s, he would take myself and another colleague, Jerome Bruner, to the newborn nurseries, pick out a baby, and he would show Jerry Bruner and I all these things that Claudia just talked about: following the face, listening to a voice, the baby being able to self-quiet herself if they got distressed. And for me, the experience was not only extraordinary, but I was a newly minted PhD, And I thought I knew everything about infants. And there's Barry Brazelton showing me day after day, time after time, things that I, as a new PhD, knew could not be true. And he showed me these things, and it was astonishing. It was nothing less than astonishing.
And Dr. Gold used the word purposeful movements. So when we examine newborns, we often kind of whisk through and due to time, and we see the primitive reflexes or the newborn reflexes, such as the gag, the moro, which is the startle reflex for our viewers, the suck, swallow, and rooting reflex. But these are actually purposeful movements meant to convey messages to kind of get to know mom and baby bonding. And
yeah, I remember a very powerful scene as part of the Hello, It's Me project, where I had taught a couple of occupational therapists about these ways of making these observations. And there was a baby who had congenital hip dislocation, and the mom was very tentative with the baby and very worried that she was going to hurt the baby. And the OT, who had just learned this, she went in and she started with her typical kind of instructional model. You should do this and put the baby, and then she kind of slowed down and she took the baby and put the baby in the mother's arm, and the baby actually put her arm over in a way that there was just no denying. It was like, it wasn't a startle reflex. It was actually moving, and the mom she just melted. It was such a wonderful moment.
I want to switch gears just for a minute here because I think it's important to talk about tech. Everyone talks about cell phones and video games and iPads and other tech as at least part of the cause of family disconnection, and even some people say that it's contributing to out of control children. And this is for both of you. Is it really that simple? Is technology the cause of the problem, or is it something deeper?
This is another thing that's running through our book, is this search for certainty. You know, it's much more complicated than that, I think, is the bottom line. I think that that the use of the technology has meaning in the context of relationships. So when kids have plenty of opportunity for actual face-to-face interaction in a range of contexts, then the fact that they would use a cell phone, let's say the family's at a restaurant and they're bored, or, you know, now in time of COVID when screens are by necessity used more, you know, that's fine. It's just that when a child has, you know, there's a lot of stress in relationships, and let's say a parent has, you know, several young children and really not able to give their child the kind of attention that teaches a child self-regulation, then the child may escape to the phone and the parent may escape to the phone, and that leads to sort of a downward spiral of further disconnection. So you really need to look at the relational context of the behavior in order to understand its significance.
And I would add, in terms of it being complicated, that on one hand, it may lead to this kind of downward spiral, but the alternative is that the parent, as well as the child, are experiencing some kinds of stressors, and being able to disengage to screens gives them an opportunity to in fact take a break. And it may allow them then to come back together with more resources for the engagement. So to take just a simple idea that, oh, screens are bad or something like that, I think is really to miss the larger family context, and really to miss the larger developmental context that children as well as parents are experiencing.
And this is for either or both of you. In May of 2017, the French newspaper Le Monde published an article suggesting a link between cell phone use and autism. What's the scoop on this?
I actually had a comment on that article. I thought, one, like much of the cell phone research, if I can say this, the research is really very poor, and the research that was done in France on this topic was really poor, and there's no need to go into all the problems of it. I think the real problem, well, I think in terms of the ASD, the spectrum disorders, that it's pretty unlikely that there's any link between what's going on with the cell phones and the generation of autism spectrum disorders. But we have to think that a parent who has a child who may be on the spectrum also may be herself experiencing, for example, a bit of the still face. The child isn't responding. So the parent needs more time to take a break. And they may take a break in many different kinds of ways. And they may give their child a break by putting them in front of the screen. But I don't think that makes it causal. I think it reflects the underlying issue in a way that you see in the still face, that there's the child who's on the spectrum and the parent dealing with that child, that there's a greater difficulty in their relating to one another. And that has a real cost for the parent as well as for the child.
Yeah, so the two things may coexist, but that doesn't in any way make them causal. It just means that something about a child who has the neurobiological deficits that make it harder for them to reach, in that kind of a relational context, the screens play a different kind of a function than in a more neurotypical child and their caregivers.
Yeah, anytime anybody tries to ascribe a causal relationship between two things without really any context, I always just kind of ask them, well, if a volcano in Seattle erupts and you get in a car accident in Dayton, they happen at the same time, did the volcano eruption in Seattle cause your car accident in Dayton? And that usually makes them stop and think a little bit.
But your next question would have to be, were you looking at your screen while you were driving?
Probably. That would probably be the next question. Or was the phone ringing or something, or a text message? So I really enjoyed this very much. Thank you both for being on the show, and hopefully we will talk soon.
Great.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Tronick and Dr. Gold. I'll just leave you with a few final thoughts. We all experience our own little still face moments in relationships and throughout our lives in general. And without these experiences, starting in our earliest lives, we don't gain the practice or experience in dealing with and managing these stresses. So remember, starting in early infancy, if we just swoop in and not allow a baby to cry just a little bit, if we prevent a baby from experiencing any emotional distress whatsoever, that baby becomes the child who becomes the teenager, who becomes the adult that lacks the coping skills to manage these stresses and to manage life's inevitable still face moments. So without the practice of managing even life's small stresses, there's no way one can develop the tools necessary to manage life's big stresses without completely falling apart. Bottom line is this: it's not only okay not to be the so-called perfect parent, but it's actually critical to a child's development. I'll pick up my conversation with Dr. Tronick and Dr. Gold in the next episode when we explore the concept of mismatch repair. Until then, I'm Dr. Richard Allen Turner. I'll catch you on the flip side. Oh, one more thing. This interview was supposed to have been conducted in Boston face-to-face, but we talked about it and decided that the safest, most prudent course of action would be to do this remotely. So just remember, if you're out in public, follow your community's guidelines and protect yourself and others. Take 2 seconds. Put on a mask. Now I'll really catch you on the flip side. This is Dr. T. I'm out. over 50 decades? Woo! I don't think he's going to like that very much. Over 500 years? He's had a long career. Woo! Let's try that again. I'll pick up my conversation with Dr. Tronick and Dr. Gold in the next episode when we explore the topic of mismatch repair.